everyone, I'm Salem Barahmeh, the director of PIPD. Welcome to another episode of Dardashe. Today, I'm joined by two amazing and inspiring guests. Obay Aboudi, executive director at the Bisan Center for Research and Development, and Fadi Quran, campaign director at Avaz. Welcome both.
Hello, welcome Salem.
Thank you. It's good to be with you, Salem.
Good to have you. So both Fadi and Obay were recently arrested by the PA security forces for participation in protests demanding justice and accountability for the murder of Palestinian activist Nizar Banat, who was murdered and killed at the hands of also the security forces a few months ago. Since then, protests have broken out, demanding accountability and justice, but we haven't seen much happen in that regard. I want to start with you, Fadi. Can you update us on the movement and the protests and where things are at the moment?
Yeah, so essentially what's happening now is there's an attempt to reorganize. As you're aware, there were protests scheduled at the end of August, and many individuals were arrested, including Obay and I. The PA at the time was trying to make any type of protest illegal, so they had surrounded the Manara. And there was a success after that by forcing them not just to release the political prisoners, but also there was a protest with hundreds of people the day after the release. Now there are kind of efforts happening to kind of organize a broader swath of Palestinian society to make the call for justice for Nizar, for elections, and for a broad range of other asks. Nizar's hearing, one of his hearings actually happened 2 days ago, and there were some terrifying details released showing that it seems the murder was premeditated. But again, I think we will see another kind of escalation in protests coming up within the next 2 to 3 months.
Okay, thanks for the update, Fadi. I want to go to you and unpack a bit what Fadi was saying. There are demands now that are developing, not only around justice and accountability for the killing of Nizar, but also around elections. Why is that important? Why is that critical to be able to tie all these things together?
Well, I think that everyone can agree upon that the current political path of the Palestinian Authority, including Oslo Accords and situation, has reached a deadlock. We as a people need to reorganize. We as a people need to have elected leadership in order to have as much as consensus as possible among the Palestinian people, and for drawing a path to the future. This cannot happen with the current leadership. So what is needed today is having general elections for the Palestinian National Council, which is the highest body of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, for the Palestinian Legislative Council and the Palestinian Presidency, which control the Palestinian Authority. The current situation, of course, part of the deterioration that we are facing right now is that we are having an executive branch that doesn't answer to any popular demands, an executive branch that rules without any oversight, without any civilian oversight over it. And the same executive branch has even kidnapped and I would say gutted the Palestinian Liberation Organization and marginalized it for the interests of strengthening the Palestinian Authority.
Yeah, and I think this is a very critical subject. Accountability for heinous crimes cannot take place if a certain part of the Palestinian political system that is not really longer existent operates with impunity, and there aren't regular elections that give people a chance to elect and vote out of office those who've been in power for a very long time. And I think this comes back to maybe us talking about, there isn't room for an opposition. There isn't room for people to protest in the streets. So talk me through, I want to hear both your stories. Maybe we'll start with Fadi. Talk me through about the day and how you were detained and the treatment in the prison.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, it was an astounding experience because the day before, they had arrested, the PA had arrested a number of activists, including Obay, Omar Assaf, and others, just for attempting to go to Al Manara. So we as kind of different youth groups called for a protest because we didn't want that to become just a successful precedent that the PA can shut down protests. Now, the second day, there were about 400, 500 PA security forces on Al Manara, and we couldn't get there, and they were arresting anybody who was trying to get there. So we went to Mahrajan Aramallah, a festival that happens every year. There were hundreds of people, and we went near the stage and we put up pictures of Nizar, the Palestinian flags, and kind of chanted slogans against President Abbas. Now, interestingly, the hundreds of people at the festival stood up in a standing ovation for us, which was just a very moving moment. It gave us goosebumps as we walked out. And it showed that the Palestinian street at large, this was a very diverse crowd, stood with our asks. Minutes later, as we were walking away, two police cars drove towards me at high speed. They stopped me, they came, they took out their phones, they asked for a few names. They said, "Are you Fadi Quran?" They had my picture on their phone. It was clear this was a political, like premeditated arrest. And there were three very courageous women with me that tried to prevent them from arresting me, including a lawyer, but they were just there with political orders. And that's when they took me to the prison station. I think one important thing here is the room and the people I was arrested with initially are some of the kind of most well-respected Palestinians you can think of. You know, the poet Zakaria Muhammad, who was also a key figure in the cultural aspects of the PLO. Khadr Adnan, who defeated Israel in a hunger strike that spent 66 days launching or relaunching the hunger strike struggle across Palestinian prisons, etc. Khadr Adnan was beaten while we were being detained by one of the police officers. But the most ironic thing happened when I walked in to be interrogated, and they asked me, "We caught you carrying dozens of Palestinian flags," as if that was a, crime that I had committed. And I just looked at that interrogator and I said, "Are you sure you want to be interrogating me as a Palestinian for carrying Palestinian flags? Like, interrogate me about anything else." And of course, Tayyas, as we say in Arabic, his head hardened, and he just started interrogating me about these flags. Long story short, though, so that I move quickly, then they took us to the prison cells. Just dehumanization 101. I mean, we couldn't sleep on our backs because in the room I was in, there was no space. And I was with 17 kind of criminal arrestees. And so we had to sleep on our side and basically be, kind of spooning, for lack of a better word, with other inmates. And there was a COVID outbreak just 2 weeks before I was arrested. There was a 70-year-old man that appeared to be like struggling for his life, not getting the medical assistance he needed. And then they decided to collectively punish the whole room, the PA did, that I was in, to get them to pressure me to go off of hunger strike. And so fortunately, we were released 2 days later, thanks to international pressure. But I'll end with kind of the different security forces that spoke to me and that interrogated me kept repeating, "We would prefer, these are the police, we would prefer to release you. We know you didn't do anything wrong, but we have political orders and we're not the ones making the decision here," showing the complete breakdown of the rule of law within Palestine.
Thanks, Fadi. Yeah, it was a lot of harrowing reports that came out of the way Palestinians were being treated in Palestinian prisons. And I want to take it to Obay. Obay, you've been targeted a lot by the PA and security forces, I think, for your political activism. Talk to us about your treatment, but also the targeting of people for their political opinions, for their political actions, and also the lack of any form of civil liberties that exist at the moment in Palestine.
Okay, so I was actually arrested in the past couple of months twice by the PA. The first time on the 5th of July and the second one on the 21st of August. On the 5th of July, it was evident for us that the PA had made the decision to stop or to try to stop the demonstrations that were demanding justice for Nizar Banat and trying to stop the movement on the streets. What happened is that the same that Fadi described, we arrived at Al-Manara. There were hundreds of police officers. Usually, it was me and Omar Assaf. We usually arrived about half an hour earlier from the protest as a way to be there earlier to give reassurances for people to be part of the demonstrations. What happened right now, or what happened back then, was that on the 5th of July, our families and people in solidarity also came in front of the Al Balua police station, and they had a big protest in front of it, which was broadcast live on Facebook Live and other social media. The PA brought a large police force and they assaulted everyone, which caused a lot of outcry. And the next day, in the night, everyone was released, but the next day we had only remained 6 of the original 11 that were arrested. We were released the next day. On the 21st of August, they tried to do the same thing again. They tried to quell the protests. We had planned only to go for a protest on the 21st of August, but after our arrest, the protest kept on coming, and I think this has put the PA under a lot of pressure, because they reached a conclusion that they couldn't quell the protests with force. Even Omar Assaf, he was released on Monday morning, and on Monday afternoon he was arrested again for going back to Al-Manara and trying to protest. On Tuesday, when, of course, I want to say that all political prisoners, Palestinian political prisoners that were arrested, they were all on hunger strike, and this has become like a tactic for facing the oppression, that any Palestinian political prisoner arrested goes immediately on hunger strike. On Tuesday, when it was time for my release, I was saying goodbye to Fadi and the other cell, and even the police officer reached a conclusion that he told us, why are you saying goodbye to him? Tomorrow you will be back. I told them, yes, that's correct. You convinced me.
Unbelievable.
So they actually, I think the PA has given up on the attempts to quell the protests through repression, and this is, I think, something important. But I don't think that the PA has left their repression tools aside. They are trying to target other people, other activists, some of the less known activists, especially outside of Ramallah, because all of the media attention is in Ramallah, and this puts a lot of responsibility on us to bring the cases of these people. They have arrested the main witness in the killing of Nizar Banat, his cousin Hussein Banat. They are claiming that he fired bullets on someone in Hebron, and which the family completely denies. But for us, it's quite really suspicious of arresting the main witness on totally different charges and trying to criminalize the main witness in Nizar's killing. So I think that we still have a long way to go forward in order to achieve a rule of law and a democratically elected leadership for Palestinians.
Yeah, it's for those who don't know the context as well. A lot of the response to the protests demanding justice and accountability were that of arrests of the activists, but also violent attacks on people, sexual harassment of women, smear campaigns, blackmail, threats. And so it's an environment also that was dominated by fear, but I think the protests and the resilience have continued, which has been very inspiring. I want to stay with you, Obay, before we talk about the political situation in Palestine now. I want to, this is part of, I think, a larger system of apartheid, which uses mass incarceration as a tool. the large percent of the Palestinian population has been imprisoned by Israel, and you're one of those people. And in the context of a heroic escape by 6 Palestinian political prisoners from an Israeli prison, I want you to tell us a bit more about your imprisonment there and the treatment of Palestinian political prisoners in Israeli prisons, and how that is for those who don't know.
Okay, so if you're talking about the Palestinian context, you're talking about the settler colonial context that's systematically targeting Palestinians with ethnic cleansing policies. And a main tool for that is the use of oppression and apartheid prisons. The the situation for people imprisoned in Palestine is only matched, I think, by the situation of black communities in the United States back in the 1970s, especially in the Deep South. For Palestinians over 20 years old, male Palestinians, you will find almost a ratio of 1 out of every 2 people, Palestinians, have suffered from Israeli jails being arrested, and this is quite a lot. We are quite a small community, so when you're talking about over 1,200,000 arrests since 1967 until today, that figure adds up a lot. The systematic targeting of Palestinians is trying to dehumanize us and criminalize our story, our struggle, our quest for freedom. And this is actually evident in every facet of Israeli oppression that's practiced on Palestinian prisoners, from illegal strip searches that a new Palestinian prisoner is welcomed by the Israeli prison authorities, and where they try to dehumanize you and to embarrass you by taking away your clothes and trying to humiliate you, from the prison situations where the threat of use of violence from Israeli prison guards against Palestinian prisoners is always there, always continued. Actually, the Palestinian Studies journal has published a special issue just recently on the situation in Israeli apartheid prisons, and from what people can gather from the affidavits that have been given is that what the Israeli prison system is there for is trying to break your spirit as a freedom fighter, as someone who is part of people, and trying just to make you think about daily needs of eating and drinking, which are also not even given enough for Palestinians. Of course, for Palestinian prisoners, there has been a collective consciousness that has developed, a sense of collective resistance also, because when you're talking about people that are in Israeli jails, you are talking about university professors, doctors, political leaders, political organizers, etc., from every facet, of course, of Palestinian life. So, for example, in Ofar prison, in my last imprisonment, we had an award-winning physicist, professor of physics, Dr. Ahmad Barghouthi, and he actually used to give Palestinian prisoners courses in physics while he was in prison, from basic physics, the start of the universe, etc., to how to understand everyday things. And these kinds of topics, I think, from talking to scholars worldwide, we're really amazed about the level of education and the level of awareness that Palestinian prisoners get out with, because this is actually when you're imprisoning the best minds of Palestinians, they actually try to light a candle in every dark cell that they are in.
Inspiring ending. I think that's quite amazing. Fadi, I wanna tie the two threads. What in terms of talking about the political situation in Palestine, why is it so critical to address the internal Palestinian political situation in order to better confront settler colonialism and apartheid?
That's a really important question, Salem. So thank you for bringing it to this discussion. I think what we are learning as particularly a younger generation of Palestinians is that in order to defeat apartheid, colonialism, in order to unite our people across the different geographic locations that they exist, we need a leadership that actually represents our will as a nation. And currently, both the leadership as individuals, Mahmoud Abbas, Hussein al-Sheikh, and also the structures they built in terms of how the PA functions, in terms of how the PLO has been monopolized by these individuals and kind of calcified, have become, instead of a liberation movement that seeks to end this colonial apartheid regime, an actual peg, a subcontractor that allows the continuation of this process. So whether it is the security coordination, where certain PA security forces give information, intelligence to the Israeli side, or arrest youth, or silence change makers, or whether it's the economic policies that are oftentimes corrupt, that have led to stratification and inequality, or if it's the kind of disagreement within political parties, mainly Fatah and Hamas, and they're kind of putting their personal political gains before the national interest. All of these things come together, have made us realize that without transforming our leadership, without bringing young women and men that share our values, that represent what Palestinians want, into power to shift our strategy towards resistance, we're just going to stay like hamsters into the status quo. And it's important to note here that there was, I think, over the last probably 20 years, particularly with the start of Oslo, there was an honest discussion, I think amongst most of Palestinian society, which is, is the two-state solution and the Oslo Agreement and the Palestinian Authority a stepping stone towards the broader liberation that we want, or is it a block? And I think what our generation is waking up to after the Second Intifada and after Mahmoud Abbas's policies over the last decade and a half is that it's no longer a conversation. It has become abundantly clear that this regime and its leaders are not liberators in any sense of the term. Their strategy has failed, and we need something new. And that's why I think they are going against, targeting people like Nizar Banat, trying to prevent protests, attacking women and harassing them in the streets, and providing, again, like what happened with Obay, when and I don't know if Obay mentioned this, but the Israeli forces, after Ubay's recent arrest by the PA, also entered and ransacked his offices and the Bisan Center. So they're kind of one system that's functioning to oppress our people, and we need to get rid of them. We need to do that with the least costs possible, because what the PA, and I think this is important for young Palestinians living abroad specifically, the PA has two strategic goals in how it's trying to silence us. Blackmail, which is it's either us or bloodshed, it's either us or chaos. And the second way they do this is isolation. So they want to say, like, Palestinians around the world, don't be involved in politics. This is not for you. This is our little banana republic state, and we deal with politics here, and we don't want you to be part of it. And we need to fight against those two threats.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Fadi. And before we wrap up, I just want to get a sense from both of you, what can people do to support, whether it's Palestinian prisoners or Palestinians in the struggle in general? Obay and then Fadi.
Well, we actually just launched a petition for all Palestinians to sign. This petition has, I think, the widest consensus among all Palestinians. It has been debated and discussed with most Palestinian groups, factions, activists on the street, etc. It has three main demands that I think that everyone can relate to. The first one is democratic change, having PNC, PLC, and Palestinian presidency elections. The second one is justice for Nizar Banat, because we are demanding an independent inquiry commission, and as it is evident from the facts that came out of the court, his murder was premeditated. It was not an accident. And the third one is freedom. We are talking about political freedom, we are talking about social freedom, and we are talking about accountability for members of the Palestinian security forces and authority that have ordered the crackdown on Palestinian activists, families, women. Actually, some Palestinian families, 3 generations of the same family were assaulted by the Palestinian Authority, from the grandparents to the children to the young kids, even as young as 5 or 4 years old. And I think that having Palestinians mobilize, believing in our ability to enact change, is something important. We also have we're going to have a vigil for Nizar Banat on the 9th of October in the yard of the Palestinian Legislative Council, which will have a double meaning. The first one is that the case is not forgotten, and the second one is that we are demanding free and democratic elections for all Palestinians.
Where can people find the petition?
It's wepalestinians.com/memo.
Great, thank you, Obay. Fadi, we turn to you. Any final remarks, closing words on what people can do?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good that people continue to listen to this podcast because I think they can learn a lot from it. And so thank you also, Salem and PIPD for leading it. And I want to get a little bit meta after that, which is to say that for anybody who does exercise, you know that the more you train and the heavier you train, the bigger muscles you build. Or if you play chess, the more you play chess, the more you practice, the more your brain becomes able at seeing forward and seeing things more complexly. Or if you play an instrument, you can, you learn to play it better. If you're on the guitar, for example, the more you practice. And it's the same thing with leadership and resistance. You can't just read about it and learn about it. You need to practice it to build muscles. And so I want to call particularly to the Palestinians listening to this podcast, which is within your communities, begin practicing leadership and resistance. Think about where you can resist, where you can bring your community together, and what you can lead them to achieve. Because this is not a situation where one wonderful leader is going to come like Simba and the Lion King, or Braveheart in Scotland and kind of change the day. This is on every single one of us, and we need to practice it to be good at it in every community that we are. So that's my kind of big meta ask is don't wait for somebody, and don't just keep reading. Kind of get on the ground, get your hands dirty. The second thing I'll say is more practical, which is that I think that we are now at a moment where we need to start publicly saying that the current Palestinian leadership as it exists does not represent us, nor does the narrative that they speak to represent us. And I think it's important for all of us to repeat that also publicly on Twitter, on Facebook, because no one can rule you unless your back is bent. And we need to be honest that currently as Palestinians in Palestine and across the world, our backs are bent. We're not speaking loudly enough to say these people don't represent us. It's time to pull away their legitimacy. So signing the petition is one step, but social media and kind of amplifying that narrative is key. And then the third thing is kind of very, very practical, which is to say that there are a number of campaigns that are being waged to create and build kind of a new leadership model across Palestine that is collective, that is networked. And I want to encourage you, if you're an individual who truly cares about this, you can follow me on Twitter, you can follow Salem, you can follow PIPD, you can follow Avaz. Just reach out to us and we can help you get into those different kind of circles and conversations so that we can, within the next 6 months to a year, hopefully rebuild the Palestinian leadership and have grassroots leaders that are the ones driving our cause forward instead of, old men that barely remember what happened last week. And I'll end with that. So.
Great. Thank you, Fadi. Thank you, Obay. It's a pleasure to have you both free and back on the streets, active, and all the power to you. And thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you, Salem. Thank you.
شكرا.
And salute to everyone. All the